You are a bad father, Pastor Mark. No, I'm an amazing father is what I am, because my kids have fun when they hang out with me. You say, well, couldn't they have died? Yeah, thank you, by the way. Couldn't their kids have died? No, they would have hurt themselves badly, but they wouldn't have died. I wasn't really putting them at extreme risk, just a small risk.
Welcome to Church of the Rock from Winnipeg. Stay tuned to this week's thought-provoking message from Pastor Mark Hughes.
Well, this morning, my Father's Day message is entitled Mr. Big Stuff. How many of you remember that song? You have to be a little older, 1971, Gene Knight, Mr. Big Stuff. How many of you remember that? Not too many. It was number one on the R&B charts and then crossed over and was number two on the pop charts. And, it was just one of those songs. And I'm going to ask the question from the song. Who do you think you are, Mr. Big Stuff? And I don't ask that question pejoratively. I'm asking you, who do you think you are? Because guess what? In your household, fathers, you are Mr. Big Stuff. Let me ask you this. Who is the patron saint of bad fathers? Anybody know? That's Homer Simpson is who it'd be. I mean, seriously, possibly the worst father ever. Every episode, he's throttling Bart, right? And yet, when we look at him, he's lazy, he's cowardly, he's selfish, he's undisciplined. There's really nothing terribly good about this man as a father. Yet, this is what Bart says. Bart says, the man I admire most is not a rich man. He is not a famous man. He's not even a smart man. He's my father, Homer Simpson. And here it is. You've got Bart, and he adores his goofball buffoon father, Homer, because there's just something about fathers, right? George Bush Sr., when he was president, he made this very famous comment. He said, our nation needs to look more like the Waltons than the Simpsons. And you know what? You could argue that that is true, but this is what I think. I don't think he actually got the Simpsons. There's a bunch of people who don't actually get the Simpsons. Let me explain this to you in case you're one of them. The Simpsons is satire. It is spoofing our culture. It's not actually suggesting we live like that. What it is doing is it's a social commentary on how lost we are and how bad we are and what's wrong with our culture. That's what it is all about. When you look at the sort of extreme things that come out of Homer's mouth, you can't actually take them seriously. For example, he says to Bart, he says, Bart, if you want something in life, you have to work for it. Now, be quiet. They're announcing the lottery numbers. He's sitting in the bar, looks at his watch, and he goes, well, 1 a.m. Time to go home and have some quality time with the kids. He says to Marge, Marge, don't discourage the boy. Weaseling out of things is an important skill to learn in life. That's what separates us from the animals. Well, except, of course, the weasel. And, they're all just ridiculous lines that are actually skewering American culture and what is wrong with it. In fact, I would argue this. I would say The Simpsons doesn't actually undermine the family. I think that it celebrates the family. Because what it does, if you look at The Simpsons in the whole and you look where it's going, it actually takes the family and says, this is the one thing that makes sense. The family is the one cornerstone in a very lost and a very broken and a very fractured world. And so that's what the family is all about. And incidentally, on the Simpsons note, you know that it is the #1 longest running weekly series of all time, surpassed Gunsmoke a long time ago, 27 years, 596 episodes. Now, someone's a fan of Simpsons. I'm not done yet. Just for the record, 596 episodes, just for the record, this week will be 614 for me. Hello, booyah, winning. Apparently, you don't agree. All right, this morning what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at a father that you wouldn't think of as an exemplary father, but he actually is. And that is Job. When we think of Job, what do we think of? Suffering is what we think of. But when you look into Scripture, you discover he's actually an excellent father. I mean, he wasn't like Noah, who cursed his kids, or Isaac, who had favorites, or David, who had this terrible moral failure and moral example, or Eli, who exhibited benign neglect. He was actually an amazing father. And we're going to go to the book of Job, chapter 1. We're going to read the first 5 verses, and this is what it says about Job. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. And that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and shunned evil. And 7 sons and 3 daughters were born to him. Also, his possessions were 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 female donkeys, and a very large household, so that this man was the greatest of all the people of the East. Now his sons would go and feast in their houses, each on his appointed day, and would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. So it was, when the days of feasting had run their course, that Job would send and sanctify them, and he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of all of them. For Job said, "It may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." Thus Job did regularly. So there's a little snapshot of Job. And of course it mentions that he was the greatest man in all the East, and it mentions his camels and his sheep. But that's not the essence of it. It talks about how great his household was. And it talks about, the first thing it mentions, before it mentions his wealth and before it mentions his animals, it mentions the fact that he had 10 children. And in his culture, a rich man was not one who had animals. A rich man was one who had children. Happy is the man whose quiver is full, the scripture says. There's a joke that goes like this: what's the difference between a man with 10 children and a man with $10 million? Well, the one with 10 children doesn't want any more. Okay, some of you think that's funny, some not so sure. I told that a few years ago, and there was this woman came literally storming up to me. She was not a happy camper that day. She has 16 kids. And she says to me, "Tell me this, Pastor Mark, which of my 16 kids should I not have had?" To which I said, "Well, I don't know. I haven't met them all yet." I did not say that. But I thought it. And here's the thing I want you to understand. She actually had it right. Because happy is the man whose quiver is full. The scripture, Psalm 127, says what? It says this, that children are a heritage of the Lord. They are his reward. The greatest reward, the greatest wealth that we will ever have is our children. There's nothing else. See, here's what happens. When, at the end of your life, your wealth, it just fritters away, but your children and your generations and your legacy goes on through your progeny. There is nothing more powerful and nothing more important in your life than your kids. Now, I know about this point. Some of you are thinking, "Pastor Mark, I've read this story, and I know what happens." And Job actually loses his 10 children. And you'd be right. And so I better get this out of the way at the beginning, and this story will have a happy ending. But it is true. There was four major waves of calamity in Job's life, and one of those calamities, he lost all 10 of his children. They were in the house, they were having one of their feasts, and the wind came and knocked the house down. All 10 of them were taken out all at once. It says that Job lost all his other possessions as well. He lost all his wealth, and he lost his health and everything else. But his greatest grief was the losing of his children. And it says he tore his clothes and he shaved his head, and he went down and he worshiped God, and he did not blame the Lord. And you see, that's unique, because what happens in the midst of tragedy a lot of times is what we do is we run away from God instead of running towards him, because at that moment, he's actually the only one that can help. And Job knew that. But if you don't know this, I want to share this with you. There is no greater tragedy, there is no greater grief in a person's life than losing a child. I mean, you can have all kinds of things befall you, all kinds of calamities befall you, but losing a child is probably the most significant in my experience and what I've witnessed. There is more pain and more grief and more burden from that than anything else. I know from my own family, my brother drowned in the Red River at 2 years old on Father's Day. I saw what that did to my father. My father never quite recovered from that. It was a grief that he carried right to the grave with him. There's something that it does to us, because we're not meant to outlive our children. We're meant to die before them. That's how it goes. I have a friend of mine, he's a pastor, and his story is like Job's. It's so bizarre. He got married. They could not have kids for many years. Finally, his wife got pregnant. They were so excited. They gave birth to a child, their one and only son. And when he was 8 years old, they were traveling down this highway. They were in a car accident, and their son was killed in this car accident, their only son. And it was a terrible year for them. They had just a lot of grief and pain in dealing with this. A year later, to the day, his wife was on this same highway and was in a car accident, and he lost his wife. I mean, you listen to that story, you think, how is that even possible? I mean, it's stranger than fiction. But in fact, it happened. And I saw whenever he spoke about it, there was such pain in his voice and such pain in his eyes, you could see it. But I'll tell you something, when he ministered to grieving people, there was a profound compassion that I've actually never seen before in anybody, because he carried this sense of loss in him. And he never blamed God. Like Job, he understood that God was his answer, and it drove him to God instead of away. Well, as we look at Job today, despite the sadness of his beginning on this, there are some great examples in Job's life. And what we're going to do is I'm going to take the Mr. Big thing, the B-I-G, and I'm going to take those three letters, and I'm going to talk about you, and I'm going to talk about Job as a father. And this is what B-I-G stands for a father. Here it is. The B stands for be an example. The I stands for instill family values. And the G stands to go to God in prayer. You want to talk about an example? Job was an exemplary example, was he not? It said he was blameless, he was upright, he feared God, and he shunned evil. If there was ever someone who gave an example for his kids, it was Job. And here's why example is so important. As you look in Scripture in the Old Testament, there's a little expression. It appears again and again and again, all the way through the Old Testament. It says, and he walked in the ways of his father. And what you discover is this, is that children will actually emulate their father. They will imitate their father. And what you do, men, as fathers, your kids will do. A great example of that is King David. King David was a man after God's own heart. He was a great leader. He was passionate. He was a worshiper. And out of all David's good qualities, he had at least one bad quality. What was David's weakness? Anybody know what David's one weakness was? Yeah, the babes. I heard Pastor Keith said the babes. That was you that said that, wasn't it? And women. I mean, he had this thing for women. We all know the story of his tryst with Bathsheba. But maybe you don't know this, that King David had 8 wives. They're named in Scripture. 8. Those are the only ones that we know about that have names. So that's him. That's his example that he gives. So he has a son named Solomon. Solomon excels him in every way. Solomon is a more passionate person. Solomon is a better leader, builds a greater kingdom than his father ever did. He's wiser by far than his father. Yet he took his one weakness and took it to extraordinary lengths. Would you not agree? Right? I mean, his thing for the ladies, how about it? 700 wives and 300 concubines. Really? Or as my daughter used to always say, 300 porcupines. Who would want 300 porcupines, Daddy? And I thought, if she thinks it's porcupines, I'm going with it because I don't want to explain to her what a concubine is. But seriously, men, think about this just for a moment. 700 wives and 300 spares? You can't even handle the one you have now. What would you do with all those ladies in your life? You wouldn't, it's just mind-boggling. It's hard to know what to even do with this. And see, I think the thing for us to understand is this, that whatever we do, our kids are going to do those same things. The father's example, in particular, especially over the mothers, has a greater effect. Let me tell you a story that will illustrate this. It's kind of humorous. I think you'll enjoy it. So we were on summer vacation a number of years back. My kids were younger. In fact, they were 9 and 7 and 4. And we were on vacation, and some people had come to see us. We were on Lake of the Woods, and we got into a boat, and we had a big boatload of people, and we drove 10 miles down Lake of the Woods. South of Lake of the Woods, there's an island there called Hay Island. And Hay Island has these diving rocks. They're 27 feet straight out of the water. And the water's deep, and you can jump off, you can dive off. They're just a lot of fun. And so we've got this boatload of people. We get down the lake, and we're just parked off the shore like this. And so I told Kathy, pull out the camera. I'm going to go do some Tarzan stuff off the rock, and you stay here and take pictures of the old man. And so So I dive in the water and I'm swimming over. My 9-year-old dives in the water. My 7-year-old dives in the water. My 4-year-old, wearing an orange life jacket, dives in and follows us over. So we climb up the path and we're standing there on the top, me and my 3 little kids. And then, of course, I'm calling out to Kathy because, we got people there. I'm going to show off, I mean, sun's out, guns out, baby. You know how it works. And so I said, make sure you got the camera running. And so she's ready, and so then I dive off looking ever so beautiful, and into the water I go. So then I'm down in the water, and I turn around to see what my kids are going to do. 9-year-old, he's not 10 seconds behind me. Boom, off my son goes into the water. My 7-year-old, 1 minute behind him. Boom, off she goes. And then everybody's standing there wondering what our 4-year-old daughter in the life jacket's going to do. Well, I know what Kathy was saying. She was saying, no, don't jump. No, don't jump. I gave her a little wink. Off she went. She was just looking for approval from her dad. I gave her a little wink and boom, off she goes. 4-year-old wearing a life jacket, for goodness sakes. Boom, into the water she goes. Life jacket on, pop, out she comes like a cork out of the water. Everybody's in horror and cheering at the same time. And you say, well, why would they do that? You are a bad father, Pastor Mark. No, I'm an amazing father is what I am, because my kids have fun when they hang out with me. You say, well, couldn't they have died? Yeah, thank you, by the way. Couldn't the kids have died? No, they would have hurt themselves badly, but they wouldn't have died. I wasn't really putting them at extreme risk, just a small risk. And see, here's what I'm trying to show you. Their mother was in the boat saying, no, no, and their dad was cheering them on without saying a word. All I did was look at her and wink. Boom, off she went. You see, this is what you need to know, dads. Monkey see, monkey do, and your kids are monkeys. That's what you need to know. They're going to follow your lead. Now, of course, that's just a whatever story. But let's take it to what really matters in life. And one of the things that matters in life is what we do. And there's this story of this man, he's driving his daughter somewhere, and they're going along in the car. He's speeding because they're late. He gets pulled over by the cops. And when he hands him his driver's license, he's got a $100 bill in it. The cop takes the $100 bill and lets him go. I don't know if that really happens in real life, but it happened in this story. And so he never said a word to his daughter, but his daughter saw it happen. And she knew exactly what happened. A week later, she gets caught cheating at school on a test and gets sent home, and they're mad at her. And of course, her father goes up to her and says, what got into you? We didn't bring you up this way. Where did you learn to cheat? And she says, from you, Daddy. I saw you do it last week with the cop. And see, here's what I want you to understand, man, is that you can go on all day about saying what the right thing to do is, but at the end of the day, it's what you actually do that will carry the day. And see, here's where I want to challenge you on this. You know what? You can't be a perfect father, right? I mean, you can't all be me. Understand that. You can only be yourself. None of us can be perfect fathers. And you don't have to be perfect. But what you need to do is you need to endeavor to be the best father and, may I add, the best Christian you can be. Because that's the example your kids are watching. And let me tell you something. They will do what you do. You need to understand that. And what I see men going off and doing these incredibly stupid things. And they don't realize the example and the effect it's having on their children. And they say to me, but don't I deserve to be happy? You know what my answer to that is? No. Not if it makes somebody else stumble. You don't need, they say, well, kids are very resilient. They'll bounce back from that. You know what? Your kids aren't made out of plastic. Your kids are made out of clay. They don't bounce back from anything. You know what they do? They get imprinted. Everything we do imprints something on those little souls and those little hearts of theirs, and they carry it for the rest of their life. And then they're surprised that later on the road, they're doing exactly the same things that you do. Why? Because the scripture says that the sins of the father are visited down to the 4th and 3rd generation. You see, that's what happens. They will do what we do, not what we say. So the first thing, the B, is be an example. The I is instill family values. One of the things that I think is evident in the story of Job is that his kids are all together. His kids are all living in proximity. His kids are loving each other. They're even inviting their sisters Who does that? And they're getting along and they're loving each other. And there was something about being a family and sticking together. And in that time of history, families were very tight, very close, and family was everything. And that's what Job's desire was, that his family would understand the importance of family. But if we're really honest, we are losing this big time today. This sense of family and this sense of togetherness, and people just go off and they live in other cities, which is fine, but we have people that won't even speak to one another anymore. There's something wrong with that. Let me tell you a really painful story. My wife, Kathy, used to work at Victoria Hospital Lifeline, and it's for elderly people or infirm people, and they have that emergency button. And one day they brought in a woman. She was 90 years old. She was living in a home, and all of a sudden, instantly, she went blind. And so they called the ambulance and they brought her into emergency. She was fine the day before, and now she's blind. And the doctors looked at her and said, she's gone blind and her sight's not coming back. And so they said, we have to do something with her. And so they realized that she was a member of Lifeline. So they called up. Kathy was working that night, and she looked up the contact information, and her children, grown children, obviously, if she's 90, they're like 60 or older, and they're living in Toronto. So Kathy phones up the parents living in Toronto and says, we have your mother here. She's in the emergency ward. She's gone blind. She can't go back living where she was because of her new disability. What would you like us to do with her? And then this is what her kids said. They said, well, we don't know what you should do with her. She's not our problem. And isn't that one of the most painful things that you've ever heard? But we're living in a culture now where people are starting to act like that in elder abuse and elder neglect, and not realizing that family was supposed to be family, and not understanding this sense of togetherness. And you know, as you travel the world, and some of you, especially those who travel in missions, one of the things you see is you see a much more powerful sense of family in many parts of the world, particularly in the third world. Here we are, we have all these material possessions and we value them so highly. And in these countries, a lot of them don't have anywhere near what we have, but one thing they have that we don't have, and they have a sense of family like we can't even begin to understand. They love each other and care for one another and take care of it, and they enjoy one another's company, just like Job's children did. Many of you know we just returned from Nepal, and it was sort of interesting in Nepal because the families all lived together. And when I say they live together, I mean multi-generational. It would be not uncommon to see 3 or 4 generations all working together. And because of the lack of jobs, which is just true in Nepal, there's probably only 1 out of every 4 or 5 people even has a job. And so you have these huge families that are living together, and maybe one person has a job. And they're all living together and they're caring for one another. There's no old age security. There's no welfare. You have to take care of your family in these cultures. And so that's what they do. So there we were. And we were doing this conference, and there was 100 pastors and Bible translators that were with us. And many of them had come without their families, obviously. And they were men without their wives and without their families. And so what happened was we were at this retreat center that was very Spartan, and there was just one cook, and that was it. And so this is what happened. The leader of this stood up and he explained to these men, these Nepali men. He said, now, there's no one here to do your dishes. Your wife isn't here. Your mother isn't here. Your mother-in-law isn't here. Your daughters are not here. You're going to have to do your own dishes. Now, this was like beyond belief for these guys, because most of them had never done a dish before in their lives. And now they're going to have to do their own dishes. So this is what they did. They set up an assembly line, and this woman came and taught them how to wash a dish. And so that's what she's doing. See the guys looking at it? Oh, that's how you do it. And so you're saying, what are you doing there, Mark? Well, I'm taking pictures and also learning to wash a dish because I've never done it either. And so anyway, the water was just like brown, like I can't even, it looked like coffee. And they were washing these dishes in this brown, terrible looking water full of junk. But those guys were going at those dishes. They were down there scrubbing it like this, like they were polishing a rusty hubcap. And I just cracked up. I'm sitting there taking pictures of it. I've never seen anything like it. So anyway, while I'm speaking to them, they know I'm from Canada. They wanted to know a little bit about Canada. And then they asked me about the family in Canada. And then I said, well, in Canada, we've actually redefined the family. And we've actually redefined marriage. And we've actually redefined gender. And I started telling them these things, and as they were coming out of my mouth, I realized how embarrassed I was about these things. And I was telling them what our kids are learning in the schools about sexuality. And I thought, I can't believe this is the world in which I live, and I'm telling these people. And they sat there absolutely aghast. And so here's what I want to say to you men here. It's so important for you to instill family values into your children, because guess what? Your kids are not going to get it from the internet. They're not going to get it from movies, and they're not going to get it from TV, and they're not going to get it at school. In fact, they might get the opposite from school. And you know what? Sadly, they might not get it at church. My greatest joy of a pastor is not that you come to church. It's not that you're sitting here, and I'm glad you're here, by the way. You know what my greatest joy as a pastor is that my kids come to church. And that my kids still love coming to church. And that my kids, for whatever reason, still love to hear me preach. Go figure. That's a mystery. And the fact that they're still in the church, their friends are over there cheering. We don't like it, but I'm glad they like it. Good for them. And you know, I remember hearing years ago about a guy named Billy Sunday. Before there was a Billy Graham, there was a Billy Sunday. And Billy Sunday got saved out of alcoholism, became a great evangelist, and all kinds of people got saved. At the end of his life, he said this. He said, my greatest regret is that I have seen tens of thousands of people come to Christ, but I've lost my own children. And I remember hearing that when I was first a young pastor. And I thought, I don't want my story to look like that. And I'm not going to make that mistake. And I'm not going to let church be a place where my kids resent to be. And so this is what I would do. I would always make them a priority. And if I was down here and I was praying for somebody, let's say I was praying for you. And my little kid came up and started tugging on my pants like they do, the last thing I would do would be shoo away my kid. I'll shoo away you first. No, that's not what I'm going to do. I'm going to say, hey, can you excuse me just a moment? God, can you excuse me? I know you can't. And then I'd turn to my son or my daughter and say, what can I do for you? And they'd say, you know, 90% of the time is money, and you just give them, you know, give them $1 and off they go. And then I can get about business. So church didn't become a place where they regretted. Church became a place that they actually enjoyed. And a place where today they all come, they all serve. My daughter, you see her, she's on staff, and she's up here leading the service. It's my greatest joy in life. See, the family, there's nothing more important and powerful than that. Number one, the B stands for be an example. The I stands for instill family values. And the last and final thing is this, is go to God in prayer. That's the G. And here's the thing, I want to say it again. You cannot be a perfect father. That's okay, because we have a perfect Father in heaven. And wherever you lack, God's going to pick up. And one of the things we see about Job was he sounded like a pretty good guy, but he went to God in prayer. And every time his kids did something, he went and prayed for them just in case they had sinned. It doesn't say they had sinned, but just in case. You have kids. Is there any chance they could sin? You think about that one. It might be a good idea for you to be doing the same thing. And I know you're listening to this, but Pastor Mark, what are you talking about? He prayed for his kids and he lost all 10 of them. Whoa, time out for a moment. That's true. But let's think this story through. You go read the whole book of Job. You go read the end of the story. And at the end of the story, it says that God restored to Job twofold everything that he had. And so his 7,000 sheep went to 14,000 sheep. And his 3,000 camels went to 6,000 camels, and so forth. And then it says, and then God gave Job 10 more children, 7 sons and 3 daughters. And I know some of you are going, hey, whoa. Wait a minute. Why didn't he give him 20 kids? Well, let me explain this to you if you've never thought about this. He hasn't lost those other 10 kids. He still has 10 kids. They just happen to be in heaven. And one day he will have all 20 of them together. And you know what the scripture says of Job? It says he lived to 140 years of age. And he enjoyed his children and his grandchildren down to the 3rd and 4th generation. God restored the joy of family back to Job. Why? Because he was a man of prayer. You can do it, fathers. You can make it. You can change your family. You can't change the world, but you can change your family. Be an example, instill family values, and go to God in prayer, and you will be the world's greatest dad. God bless you, Mr. Big Stuff, and happy Father's Day.
Church of the Rock has services every Sunday at 1397 Buffalo Place, and we invite you to join us when you're in the Winnipeg area. If you'd like a booklet to help you understand more about God's gift of forgiveness and reconciliation through Jesus Christ, please contact us, and we'd be happy to send you a free copy of the Book of Hope. Visit our website at www.churchoftherock.ca. Thank you for watching, and God bless you.